Thanks, Becca, and thanks everyone for joining us today. We have a great team with us, and so I know we're looking forward to helping you hopefully answer all of your questions. All right. Okay, so for introductions, our director, Carrie, is normally very visible with these events, but she's been under the weather, so we certainly wish her well and wish her a speedy recovery today. My name is Katie. I'm the Brownfields Redevelopment Specialist and the TAB lead here at WVU TAB. I'm joined by of course, Becca, and then our new colleague, Seth, who's currently trying to get into the room. So well wishes to him too. And I'd like to turn it over to Sylvia to introduce everyone.
Hey, Katie, thank you. So yeah, my name is Sylvia Mosser, and I work as a resource conservation planner for the Maryland Department of Planning. And part of the work that I do here is with our Brownfields Assistance Program, where we work with local governments, nonprofits, and occasionally some private entities to offer education and assistance to help move brownfields in Maryland communities toward beneficial reuse by tapping into the technical and financial resources that are available from EPA's Brownfields program and from West Virginia University's TAB program, which Katie just talked a bit about. So in order to do this work, we collaborate closely with our partners at MDE, WVU TAB, and EPA. And we all share this common goal of wanting to help Maryland's communities take advantage of these technical and financial assistance and incentives that are out there for brownfield properties. So Katie, you said you wanted me to just introduce others or just?
Feel free to introduce the others on the team if you would like. Next slide is going to be the TAB overview.
Okay, so yeah, I guess Tish, would you just want to? Tish is from EPA. She's our project officer on the grant that we have, and she's been instrumental in helping us get a lot of brownfields work done in Maryland. So Tish, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tish Corbett. I work for EPA in Philadelphia, and Maryland is part of our region, and I'm the Brownfields team leader, but I'm also the liaison with Maryland on their Brownfields programs. So anyway, but I also wanted to mention, I don't know if everybody knows what TAB stands for, Technical Assistance to Brownfields. So they've been their West Virginia University is taking care of the whole region, which is Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, Virginia, West Virginia, and DC. So even though they're based in West Virginia, so there are TAB, not to be confused with TBAs that we'll talk about later. But yeah.
Good point.
Thanks, Tish. And then we also have Barb Krupiars from MDE, who Barb, I'll give you the opportunity to introduce yourself. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Barb Krupiars, Barb K around the office, and I am the Land Restoration Program Manager at Maryland Department of the Environment. Under the Land Restoration Program is both federal facilities work when we work with the DoD and NPL sites, but also our volunteer, the state side, where our brownfields cleanup would be part of, and that's through our voluntary cleanup program. And we also have something called the Controlled Hazardous Substance Technical Assistance Program, where we help folks who need assistance and don't need something to go through the full program of the voluntary cleanup program. And we have been doing grants with EPA for a number of years. We are still learning ourselves, but we've learned a great deal, and happy to help other people clean up brownfields in the state of Maryland.
Thanks, everyone. Seth, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. Sorry I was late getting on. I am Seth Cardwell. I'm the Community Development Associate with WVU TAB. I have been in the position for a little over 3 months now, and you'll see me towards the end of the presentation giving some reminders and next steps.
Thanks, everyone. Seth will touch on this more, as he said, later in the slide, but for now, we here at WVU TAB provide assistance throughout the region, as Tish was saying, and one of the ways we provide assistance is through Brownfield education, including webinars like today's topic, all about the current cycle of EPA Brownfield grants. So some of the topics we're going to cover today include the grants that are currently available, application details, how TAB can help, important dates to remember, and then we will have plenty of opportunities to ask questions along the way. You can either ask them in person, or you can speak up with your questions or ask them in the chat. We're going to have some actual pauses throughout the presentation if you'd like to wait until then, or if it's a burning question and relevant to the section we are at, please feel free to ask at that time. We're happy to ask, happy to hear you ask, and we will answer. All right, Tish, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay.
Yes. Some of you may know the federal government, especially EPA, does acronyms. So our grants program in the Brownfields thing is we refer to them as MARC grants. That's multi-purpose grants, assessment grants, revolving loan fund, which they're every other year announced, and cleanup grants. So that's the our whole grant program in the Brownfields program. Now this is a timeline, and as you can see, the most important date for those of you thinking of applying is November 13th. To get your applications in. One thing I have to say, please do not wait till the last minute. We've had grantees, and prospective grantees, they maybe get this, one had gotten the thing like in the afternoon, the day it was due from, I don't know if consultant or the other people in their group. And then in the evening started to try to put it on, submit the application, and there was a computer problem. So they actually ended up clicking and getting it in like 12:01 or 12:02. And our headquarters said, no, that didn't count for. So please do not wait till the last day. I know it's tough, but then you can see there's several different deadlines that we have internally. And then the selection is announced in May. Then the grant starts October 1. Yeah, next slide. Okay, this is what we're offering this fiscal year. And our fiscal year starts October 1. Of 23 and goes till September 30th of 24. So you can see we've got a multi-purpose grant, as I mentioned, which is assessment and cleanup. There'll be more discussion a little later. Then we have assessment grants for states and tribal entities, and then we have assessment coalition grants. Then the assessment CW stands for community-wide, and that's broken into new applicants and existing. And then you've got 3 different cleanup grants. And the reason we have the community-wide broken up is because a number of years ago, they decided they wanted to have some new applicants get some grants. So we took some of the money and put that in for the new applicants. And you can see, the timeline of the amount of grant. And we've gotten a lot of funding, as you can see at the bottom, from the bipartisan infrastructure bill, 145 million to our 90 million of regular funds. So as a result, we've increased the grants amounts. So next slide, please. Okay, now who is eligible for these grants? As you can see, state, general purposes of local governments, regional council redevelopment, and nonprofit and quasi-governmental. But the nonprofit, be careful, you can't be a 501c4. Because what happens is then we have to get the attorneys involved, and it's determined you can't. So don't apply if you're a 501c4, or find some other way to apply. Okay, next slide, please.
All right, now it's my turn.
Yep, go ahead.
Thanks, Tish. But Tish, I definitely asked if you have any information to chime in with along the way for this particular section. Please do so.
Sure.
All right, now we're going to talk about threshold criteria and just what is the importance of it. So when you actually submit your grant application, you have to answer threshold questions, and that determines if you are eligible to move forward. So these are evaluated on a pass-fail basis. And so certainly you want the number of pass questions to be much greater than the fail questions. And so it's to determine, again, if your project and you are eligible. So as Tish was saying, if you are determined to be a 501c4, you're going to have to reach out to someone to see if there's anything we can do to help with that. You find out after you've submitted the application, in this case on November 13th, there is a window of 45 calendar days when you will find out if you did meet the threshold eligibility criteria. If you did, you're going to move forward. If not, as she said, even the timing of it will not enable you to move forward. So there, of course, is criteria for each different type of grant. When it comes to the multi-purpose grants, when you look at each application, you can see the particular elements broken down. And so I'm not going to read over all these, but some of the highlights for multi-purpose include needing to showcase the target area that you're going to be referring to, site ownership, because there is a cleanup element involved within this application that you need to be the owner of before you actually submit your application. And if you have an existing fund, you need to demonstrate that you have drawn down at least 70% of the funds from the EPA by October 1st. Tish, anything to add?
No, not that I can think of. There was something that flew into my head, and just the multi-purpose grants have a cleanup part. And so that's where Katie was saying you have to own the property for a cleanup grant. Assessments grants, you have to have the approval of the property owner to go in and do sampling and whatnot. But that's a big difference. You have to own the property to get either a multi-purpose or a cleanup grant.
Thank you. So rolling into the assessment grants, as she said, there are different types. So the threshold criteria for community-wide and also the state and tribal applications are largely the same in that you need to show that you're eligible, community involvement, also the 70% demonstrating that you've drawn down at least 70% of existing EPA funds. And then for those who are state or tribal entities, so if you're a state environmental agency and you're looking to apply, you need to demonstrate or show where your target area and your priority sites are. So the coalition assessment grant has a little bit different criteria. You do need to show the number of your non-lead coalition members as well as their eligibility. You want to be able to demonstrate your coalition agreement that you have as your team. Again, the 70% drawdown, and then community involvement and named contractors and subrecipients if you're doing so at this time. Cleanup grants. Want to point out that while this looks like an intimidating number of criteria, it's really just kind of an affirmation. So we don't want you to panic. It certainly is a lot, again, a number, but a lot of it is just general questions, again, just trying to determine the eligibility. And so this is determining if you have received a previous cleanup grant, where you are with spending down the money, site ownership, as Tish was saying, because cleanup and multi-purpose do require owning the site before your application is submitted. Site characterization, which is what Barb and her team can help with from the MDE. Community notification, that is also a requirement for the threshold criteria here. Again, just elaborating on this more, and Barb is going to talk a bit about this on the next slide. Applicants need to show that prior to submitting this cleanup grant application, there has been a sufficient level of the site characterization from your environmental site assessment that has been done in order to get you ready to actually remediate the site. And your state environmental agency, in this case, the MDE, is the one who determines that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Barb.
Okay. There's a lot of information on this too, that folks can read later, but I wanted to include some information on some common things that have happened to folks who have tried to apply in the past and weren't successful, so we can learn from those mistakes. And one of the things that comes up quite often is that when somebody participates in the voluntary cleanup program through MDE, we require that they do a phase 1 environmental site assessment that has been completed within 1 year of the property purchase. But if you end up applying to the VCP and then deciding that you would like to apply for a cleanup grant afterwards, you may be in trouble because EPA requires that the phase 1 is completed within 6 months of the property purchase. And so, you do your 1 year with MDE, apply to the program, buy the property, and now you're stuck if it's something that's longer than 6 months. So I wanted people to understand that if you're going to apply for a grant, let's think about it early and work together to make sure we meet all the requirements of both the state and EPA. There's some interesting land swaps that have occurred in the past to be able to take these blighted properties and put them into productive use. If it's a developer that would like to get some cleanup done and then redevelop the property to put it into productive use, the local government can sometimes, take possession of the property, do the cleanup, and then and transfer it to the private entity to have the redevelopment occur. And I know that this is not speaking out of school. We've talked to EPA about doing various things, and so both WVU, MDP, and EPA and MDE, all of us will work together to make sure that all of the boxes are checked in order to get things done that way. And then the third thing that I wanted to talk about is actually something, and I'm going to defer to Tish also on this, because I believe that there's some new changes coming for the next fiscal year related to some of these grants. And my impression was always that anybody who wanted a cleanup grant had previously or would need to go through the voluntary cleanup program, and everything that is in the statute that applies to that within MDE or within the state of Maryland. I believe that there's some difference for that now, and so if there's an option where you don't have to enter the voluntary cleanup program, you still need to have sufficient characterization of the site. And so, Tish, if you wouldn't mind talking to that for a second, I would appreciate that.
Sure. Some of it is as Barb said, being worked out. But yeah, we're trying to facilitate redevelopment and revitalization, especially in small disadvantaged communities. So EPA is investigating this to just have you have either MDE or an environmental professional, as it says here, confirm significant site characterization has been done. So yeah,
Great.
There'll be more information coming out on that. Yes, yeah.
Thank you, Tish. Okay, next slide, please. Oop, that's for Tish.
So anyway, this is the eligibility chart, as you can read. It talks, has your multi-purpose grant, community-wide, all across the top. Here's your organizational. If you currently have any of these grants, this will explain what grants you can apply for this year. Okay, so I'm not, of course, going to go through this chart. It's rather involved, but that gives you an idea. If you already have one of those grants on the left, check through that chart and see what you can apply for. Okay, next slide. Here's another eligibility chart for multiple applications. If you wanted to apply for a couple different programs, you can see there's some that are not applicable and some no, and a few yeses. So again, look at this chart if you're interested in applying for more than one type of grant this fiscal year. Next, yeah. Okay, now the mark, like I said, our anagram there, or initials, and eligible activities. Revolving loan funds, as I mentioned, are not offered this year. Okay, so we have the multi-purpose grants. And next slide. Okay, so This is great for communities that have identified an area with one or more brownfield sites. You have to do both assessment and cleanup activities, because if you want just cleanup, apply for a cleanup grant. So you have to conduct at least a phase 2 environmental site investigation, which a phase 1 is pretty much a paper study, records and whatnot, state, federal, sandboard maps, all kinds of stuff. And then the phase 2 is actual sampling of the site where you can actually see what's there, where it's located. You also have to develop an overall plan for revitalization, and you have to be the sole owner of at least one brownfield site within the target area. Again, because this is a combined assessment and cleanup grant. The cleanup, you have to own the property, and not have contributed to the contamination, and had done the all appropriate inquiry within 6 months and of your ownership. Okay, next slide. So this is a range of tasks that you can do. You can develop an inventory. You can go see community engagement. That is one thing we're very we stress that a lot in the Brownfields program. We really want to see a lot of community engagement. And get input. What they if you're doing a reuse plan, what the community would like to see. At that site. Now, if you're dealing with a developer, they may have a different idea, but sometimes you can kind of convince them a little to maybe help the community out one way or another. Okay, next. Okay, here's some changes to the multi-purpose grant. Increased funding, that's one thing. You have to discuss on the community involvement side, how underserved population in the target area has been involved with the process. Okay, because sometimes you have some very vocal groups, but sometimes the underserved population does it. And one of the places we've gone to is that some of the churches, sometimes they can reach out to some of their members that are part of an underserved population. Okay, and there's things you can get now. Support costs. You're always able to, we have a national conference and you can always get reimbursed for your travel costs from the grant, but now there's other things like childcare expenses to encourage meeting attendance and travel, costs and whatnot for attendees. So that's really big. And you have to look, as I said, environmental justice challenges, that's EJ. And there's a specific section it refers to in the criteria, and climate. They are our big focuses right now. It's those. In past years, we had one year where we were trying to focus on getting rural communities to apply. But, as you've read in the newspaper, environmental justice and climate are both very important things. And then there's a paragraph about, you'll see this reoccurring, things that we want to see you address, and ending with a meaningful and equitable way, all the different things you're doing. Next slide, please. Okay, here's the assessment grants. So the next slide will show you. Okay, here's the different types of assessment grants, okay? And the maximum amounts, you can see all that. Coalition, I think, are fantastic grants because we are trying to reach a lot of smaller disadvantaged communities, and they don't have somebody who can write a grant for them. They don't have somebody to manage a grant. So this is great if a county redevelopment authority. Now you have to get these people agreeing to work with you on the grant and stuff. You just can't say you're going to target these areas, but it's a great avenue, I think, to try to help some communities in your county redevelopment authority or whatever. Get some of their issues addressed with brownfields. Community-wide is you target a certain area. And next slide, please. Okay, you can see this list of eligible activities, community involvement, planning, area-wide plans. We had a separate grant years ago that was just specifically area-wide, and we do want to stress in the cleanups to get area-wide planning. And it says identify next steps and resources needed to implement the plan. We actually, some of the applicants call it a resource roadmap, and like for Little Carlisle, PA, they did a resource roadmap. Whatever where they could apply for money, and they were able to get a $5 million US DOT Tiger grant based on their planning that they had done in the grant, the Brownfields grant. So it is really good to know what other resources, because we give you some money, EPA. We can't give you all the money, even though we've gotten more with the bill law. So next slide, please. Okay, now new changes, increased funding. Like I said, we got additional money from the bill law. It's great. We can help more communities. And then 2 sites must be assessed each member's boundary. This is an increase from 1. So if you've got your coalition, this is for coalition grants, you can't just like do it in a few communities. If you've got, a number of people in the coalition, you have to address at least 2 sites. Again, here's these participant support costs, which I just mentioned, childcare and whatnot. And again, we've got the EJ challenges and the climate vulnerabilities. You really need to discuss those. And again, describe your efforts to promote strong labor practices and all the things there in that practice in a meaningful and equitable way. Okay, next. Okay, now community-wide assessment and the state and tribal, you have to, again, the environmental justice challenges and the climate vulnerabilities, and you can see the same thing again, where you kind of get a getting a theme here. So next slide, please. Okay, here's our cleanup grants. Multi-purpose is a relatively new thing, past 5 years or so, I guess. Before it was either you got assessment or cleanup. The multi-purpose, it's nice they combine the 2. But cleanup grant, it can either be for a single site or multiple sites. There's reporting, monitoring, different things, a redevelopment planning, a reuse plan we like to see around the brownfields impacted area, and with sampling activities and cleanup alternatives with specific cost estimates are required for these grants. So usually, like I said, somebody's already done work investigating the property, so you kind of what's happening there and what the cost would be then as a result. Okay, next slide. Okay, here's the important thing about cleanup, and this works for the multi-purpose, the cleanup sites. Must be the sole owner of the site by the time the application. And you must have conducted, Barbara's talking about, what we call all appropriate inquiries prior to acquiring the property. And there's standards that have been developed for that. So even though Maryland has a year, you might want to wait till 6 months so you cover EPA. And sometimes when these things draw out, you just do an update to the AAI. You have a professional engineer who usually probably you want to use the one that you already had, who already prepared the AAI, but things get delayed sometimes. So you'll just have to update it if it goes into 7 or 8 months. And this is a phase 1 environmental site assessment, basically. You cannot be liable in any way for the contamination of the site or affiliated with any person. This is very important. And what we've had, like in some towns where they've had a town dump for, decades, because they have some liability there, they can't do it. But if there's a redevelopment authority or someone else, they'll sell that property to them for their dollar. They have to do their all appropriate inquiry 60 days before they purchase that property from the town. And then they can apply for the grants and then sell it back to the town for $1 afterwards. We don't want to penalize, places that things were done years and years ago, especially municipalities, counties, states, before there were any kind of regulations. And, it's sitting right in the middle of a town and, not everything kind of is on standstill because of the status of that site. Okay, next slide. And here's the new changes. Increase the funding, like you see. Then the state determination letter must clearly indicate that the information is for the 24 cleanup grant application and not a previously submitted applications. Because unfortunately, not many people get a grant on the first go around of applying. It usually takes 2 times. And in fact, the Maryland Department of Planning, as Sylvia can tell you, they didn't get it on their first go round. So it's just very competitive. So, you can't just take some things if you submitted the year before and attach them. you have to show specific examples how it will address EJ and climate again. Again, that same paragraph about efforts to promote strong labor practices, everything in a meaningful and equitable way. Now, construction, classifying construction costs. This is a little bit something new. We recommend applicants apply principal purpose of the contract test. And so if the principal purpose for the contract is construction services, then the cost for the contract should be placed on the construction budget line. And there'll be a budget table. If you've looked at it already, our RFP will tell you what you need to do, and they'll list in the budget section the different information, how you have to break it down for us. So now they're changing a little bit, so because we were just getting large groupings in contractor, and we really want to have a little better handle on where that funding is actually going on construction costs. Okay, next slide. Okay, so cleanup grants and multipurpose. You need to put an ad in a local newspaper or equivalent means to communicate with the target community. And you have to do this 2 weeks before the application is submitted. And in that, you have to have a copy of the grant application, like in a library, and you can see, and this type of thing. So in some respects, that's really good, because then hopefully you won't be waiting to that last evening to submit your application, since you have to have a draft of it 2 weeks before at the library or somewhere where the community can access it and get comments from the community. That then, you've got the bulk of the work done since you've drafted this document, and then you may tweak it based on some, hopefully, if community gets commented and feels pretty strong about it, that you've made some adjustments in your application. Okay, next slide. Okay, now this is the public meeting that you're going to set up. You just the draft application, of course. And like I said, you need to consider the public comments. You can have it, if you already have a regularly scheduled community meeting already set up, you can combine it. It can be in person or virtual. And then this is what you have to attach to the grant application: the comments or a summary of the comments, what your response is, meeting notes or summary of public meeting, and sign-in sheets or participant list. And again, like I said, sometimes when you're using, dealing with disadvantaged communities, sometimes outreach to the churches is really, really a good way to try to get more people involved. Okay, next slide. Okay, any questions?
Tish, I think you need a water break. That was a lot.
I know. And I hope I'm not talking too fast. I tend to.
No, you're doing a great job.
Okay, because I'm from New Jersey. I don't know if that makes any difference, but I talk really fast.
Great job. Does anyone have any questions to this point? All right, sounds good. Next up is, well, Tish, hopefully you're up for this, talking about the grant package. And that's going to start with the narrative information sheet.
Yes. Okay, there's different sections of the grant if you've looked at RFP that we put up. And this is limited to 3 pages. That's another thing. Please go by the page limits, because if we say 12, like we have a contractor go through the applications and get everything in order before we start reviewing. So if you submitted 13 pages, like that 13 page is gone. And sometimes, you want to get points in everything for every section. So you really want to stick to the pages. Something I have to. And this is just, you give us all the information, what grant type you're applying for, and the location, property information, site-specific, and cleanup grants only, site-specific assessments. Your contacts, the population. In cases, other factors are the letter from MDE and releasing copies of the application. So that's other factor checklist. Okay, next page. Does somebody have a question? They want to say something?
Yes. So we have a couple of questions in the chat, if you wouldn't mind answering those.
Sure.
So first off, to clarify, what if someone already owns the site?
If you own the site and you're an eligible entity, before you purchase it, you have to have done all appropriate inquiries 6 months before. And there is a date. What's the date? where when the Brownfields law went into effect, that we kind of grandfathered in some sites that have been done before
2002.
2002. Thank you. Yeah, I was going to say. So that if you had owned the property prior to 2002, you wouldn't have to do this 6-month thing. But if it was after 2002 and you didn't do your all appropriate inquiry, then, like I said, we tell municipalities try to sell it to a qualified entity that what they have to do before they buy it from you, they have to do this all appropriate inquiry 6 months before, have, and then they apply for the grant. After the cleanup assessment is done, you buy it back from them. Unfortunately, that has to happen because anything purchased after 2002. And of course, a lot of people didn't know of this requirement. So, it's unfortunate, but yeah, that's how it works.
Perfect. Thank you. And then second question, did you say you have to include more than one property, which is a change from prior years? And can
Yes.
you clarify that?
Yeah, it's just on the coalition grants. Usually have, let's say it's a redevelopment authority county. They have, and you've got partners that within that coalition, other cities, towns, organizations, nonprofits and stuff. So you used to be in that little, let's say it's a little town that's part of your coalition or several little towns. You had to do at least an assessment on one of the properties in that little your coalition partner. Now it's requiring you have to assess two properties of that coalition partners area, and the funding did go up. So but we're trying to make sure it's not weighted heavy the coalition to like just a couple partners maybe, and the other ones kind of the money runs out or something. So that's the intent there. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay, well, if no more questions, we can, So, okay, now these are the forms that you need to submit, and it looks like a lot, but that's what the grant application process is, unfortunately. Application for federal assistance, and that's like name, address, and some other information, and then this 424A is your budget information. And there's a breakdown, and there's this one tricky part which I wish they would square away. But anyways, when TAB can help you with this. It's you put the funding for the first year, and then you're supposed to do the second, third, but the other column says first, second, third, fourth year. So anyway, it's really confusing, but you can get help from the TAB on how to do that. So anyway, and then the pre-award compliance report is 47. We have to have numbers -4. And there's guidance on how to complete the form. The project narrative attachment form. And so it's all described in the RFP, what you have to do. But these are some of the federal forms. Okay, next slide.
I just wanted to add that we will update this. I apologize, we had updated it on another one, but we'll make this hopefully a little more user-friendly with a link. That site that you
Okay.
see there does include tips. So the EPA does have a really good link that can hopefully kind of walk you through some of the steps for the forms. Try that first or call us as well and we can help. But hopefully that'll be a help. It's actually a pretty nice form. So we'll get that updated before we send it out.
Just ask West Virginia to check West Virginia University, the 424A, because it's confusing to me. I've been in the program for a while.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Next slide. Okay, cleanup grants. You have to, this is analysis of Brownfields cleanup alternatives, ABACA. Of course, like I said, we initialize everything. So you have to have the site contamination issues, the cleanup standard. Cleanup alternatives considered, each alternative considered, and the alternative chosen, including information on, there's, things you have to address, and the proposed cleanup, okay? So that's what's got to be included there, yeah. Next slide. And back to that other slide, I mean, one of the reasons that we're asking for that information is you have to have already done a phase 2, which is the sampling part. Okay, your phase 1, your background check gives you an idea what was done there for the past couple hundred years, you know. So you have to have already done a phase 2, so you know what's at the site, whether it's just asbestos in a building or some soil contamination. So that's why we're asking for some of this detailed information, because you've already done the phase 2 for the property. Okay, we're not asking you to pull it out of the sky. So, okay, next slide. Okay, goes to Barb.
Yes, so as part of the package, EPA asks for Maryland Department of the Environment to send a letter also. We ask that you give it to us, you know, a week in advance so that we can take a look at the information you're providing. It'd be helpful for us to know what information you have, who is the current owner of the property, what's been done to investigate it in the past, that kind of information that can help us send a letter of support for your grant. I wanted to put this little pitch in also for the Assessment Coalition grants. You know, EPA has been talking to us for a little bit of time on, you know, participating in these coalition grants, and we're certainly very welcome to assist local entities and so that we can clean up some of these properties that have been sitting around for a while. You know, we have the expertise to, you know, help you write the grants, to manage some of the grant, you know, administrative parts. EPA does focus on the importance of having the community have input into this. So that will be one of the requests that MDE also puts forward for folks, is to make sure that we have local engagement for whatever is planned for the future use of this property. But I just wanted to let everybody know that, you know, we're very open to assisting with these coalition grants. Okay.
Thanks,
who's
Barb.
this? Yep.
All right, so now we're going to talk about the narrative criteria, and this is broken down into 4 parts.
Thanks, Katie.
You're welcome.
So this is kind of the part of the grant I like to think of as the fun part, where you really get to kind of showcase your target area and the brownfield sites that you're highlighting. So this first section that's on here, the project area description and plans for revitalization, and then where we get down into the target area and brownfields and the background and description of the target area is where you really get an opportunity to talk about your target area's unique history and some of the features that can help make the project stand out for EP's reviewers. Then onto the description of the priority brownfield site or sites. So if this is a grant application where you're talking about multiple sites, so like, for example, a community-wide assessment grant, which is the grant that we had applied for. Like Tish mentioned, we applied one year. We were just a couple points shy of winning it, and then we reapplied the next year and got it. But this is where you get to kind of drill down and talk about what's special about the specific site that you're talking about, and why it's really especially in need of the grant that you're applying for. Then into the revitalization of the target area. So here is, you're going to talk about the reuse strategy and the alignment of that strategy with any revitalization plans in the community. So this is really the section where you'll need to demonstrate that there is a reuse plan for the target area, and then explain what the strategy is. And you'll have to do your research here by kind of looking back to comprehensive plans and other community plans that show support for reuse of this particular area within your community. The outcomes and benefits of the reuse strategy is where you'll get to kind of talk about, sorry, I lost my place here. You'll get to identify for EPA the outcomes and the benefits of the reuse plan. So for example, in that community-wide assessment grant that we applied for back in, I think it was 2021 now, we described the economic development potential, the creation of some much needed parkland, and then also the facilitation of some renewable energy projects that our reuse strategy for this community-wide assessment grant included. Then on to the strategy for leveraging resources. So you'll talk here about the resources that are needed for the site reuse, where you'll highlight some of the other types of funding and other resources that your project will be eligible for and will kind of leverage to actualize the site reuse aspect of the project. You know, Tish had mentioned earlier that EPA has funding for brownfields, but they can't kind of foot the bill for the entire project. So they want to see that you have other resources that you're going to be able to access to kind of round out the project funding. And then the second section here is the use of existing infrastructure. So you'll talk here about how the project will tap into existing infrastructure, and then also describe any kind of missing infrastructure that will be needed for the project, and then what funding you'll pursue to implement those needs for infrastructure. Katie, I think I'm ready for the next slide.
Okay, can I just interject something?
Sure, yeah.
There's 3 reviewers on each application, a region 3 reviewer, a federal partner, and another region or headquarters. And I want to give money to everybody that applies, because we there's definitely so much need out there. But if you can try to tell a story, because we are reviewing a lot of applications, and we review for other regions too, so try to make it as interesting as, as you can, because after you're reading a number of applications, it's like, okay, we've heard that story before. But okay, sorry.
That's a good
just
point. No, thank you, Tish. That's a great point. Yeah, we don't want to put you guys to sleep, so keep it interesting. That's great. So the narrative criteria part 2. The first section here is talking about community need, and then identifying the community's specific need for funding. So here's just kind of another opportunity to showcase the unique needs of your project by explaining why your community in particular needs this project to happen. So, for example, again, in our grant application, we described these economic and environmental legacy impacts after this longstanding steel manufacturing facility had ceased operations in our target area, which is the east side of Baltimore County. And then this, secondly here, the threats to sensitive populations. So you'll do some research looking into census data here. I think most likely that's what we used. And then you'll show the sensitive population breakdown in your target area and explain how the project will benefit these particular community members. So you might show some of the statistics that we showed here were like the group of residents who are 65 and older, the group of residents who are new mothers, also low-income households, and anything else that you think is going to be compelling to show how kind of whatever the brownfields concern is in your community is a threat to sensitive populations. And then into this second section here, talking about community engagement. Like Tish mentioned, community engagement is very important to EPA. So it's definitely important that you guys develop a strategy for how you're going to take that on in your project, and make sure that you're engaging the community. So one of the first items here is talking about your project partners. So we provided a table where we listed all of the partners who would kind of help to implement our project, and then what their roles would be in that implementation. So yeah, that second part where we mentioned project partner roles, I think that can all be done kind of in one section. And then you'll want to talk about how you're going to incorporate community input. So, and one note here is just that you'll want to talk about the extent that the plan to communicate project progress to the community affected by the project work will be involved, and then the extent of their input, the extent that their input will be considered in a meaningful way. So you definitely want to have kind of really specific ideas mapped out here for how you're going to accomplish this, like, because it is important to EPA to see that. And then Katie, this last section here where we're talking about community need for funding, I think I might need a little help in just talking about how this is different from the section we went over previously. Is it just because this only applies to small and or low income communities?
I think that's really focusing on what Tish highlighted on each particular grant, where that's a big focus of the EPA this year, wanting to make sure we're talking about those communities that are underserved and using, this is a good point to say, Sylvia, where when you talk about trying to identify the community need, and then that can tie into funding, is using tools like the EJ screen tool. Yes, thank you, Barb.
Yes.
We can help you navigate that if that seems overwhelming. I'm going to say Seth on our team likes some good data and policy challenges, but it really is a great tool, and it gives you some insight into your community. So you can take that bit, and that gives you some actual numbers to tie into why you actually might need some funding, why it's a challenge, why without this grant, your community would not be able to be as successful without it.
Thank you. I noticed on just looking at the solicitation, I think for the community-wide assessment grant, that it mentioned that I guess if you're not a small and or low income community in this particular section, you might earn 2 out of the 5 points. So yeah, EPA is going to give you a bit of a boost if you meet those criteria.
Yes, I think there's not a hard and fast definition of small community, though, right? I think, Tish.
That is
it not?
correct, yeah.
Okay. I thought at one point it was
Sometimes
under
we say-
10,000.
Yeah, sometimes we do say under 10,000, yeah. But it could be, a little bigger than that. But yeah, we've used that as a benchmark before.
And
Thank
what
you.
about the low income? Is there a number for that? Or
No,
is that just
it's
a
like,
federal threshold?
yeah, well, what, I think they were saying Seth could help you. Well, the demographics you can get from the Census Bureau, and lots of times they compare it to the state average and the county average, and usually it's pretty, evident that it's a low income, and that's it. Like in California around San Francisco, the low income around them could be a lot more than the low income around somewhere in Tennessee, say, or something. I don't know. But
Makes sense.
yeah. So it's a kind of a relationship to the state and the county. And there was also something else in the community engagement, project partners, project roles. Sometimes people just because you are kind of short on space in a chart, and and we probably saw that, where you list the partners and you can have on the chart, top of their roles, and and different things like that. So there are places where you can make charts or tables. And so you don't have to use as much description, except when you really want to, tell us about that community need and really tell that story, how, your community really needs this grant.
And seriously, if you could use some assistance with pulling this data that Tish and Sylvia were mentioning, just reach out to us here at TAB, and we can help you with that piece. Thank you both.
And TAB also has prior successful applicants, copies of what successful applicants have in the past. Although, like I said, we have a really strong emphasis on environmental justice communities, disadvantaged communities, and climate change. So though some of the prior applicants may not have addressed that as much as we want to see it in this year's applicants. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, ladies. So now we're on to part 3 of the narrative criteria. And this is the section that is, as I would agree with Sylvia, is not as fun, but it is incredibly important. So this is task descriptions, cost estimates, and measuring progress. So this is where you're going to highlight the implementation of your project, the anticipated schedule of your project, the task leads for the various sections and roles, outputs of the actual grant project, and then cost estimates. And things you want to remember are to fully explain the participant support cost and the processes. Just as we were touching on a little bit earlier, just as you want to elaborate when it comes to community involvement, you want to elaborate here too. Discuss how you will identify additional sites. One of the great things about the assessment site is that it is not set in stone. So if you apply for the EPA Brownfield assessment site, you've identified some sites that you believe you want to take on for phase 1 or 2 assessments. That can change. Your priority area needs to stay the same. But if for some reason, as you get into it and property owners aren't that keen on wanting to participate in that, because as Tish said, you don't need to own the property or want to own the property for an assessment of the actual property, but you do have to have property owner approval to actually conduct the assessments. If for an example, that is something that changes, you can definitely add and remove some sites for that process. Be clear on how the cost estimates were calculated. Again, as Tish said, I like it. You shouldn't just pull it from the sky. So there should be some solid backing into how you came up with that. And then also you should take a contingency fee into consideration. It takes a whole year really for your grant application from the time you're applying here on November 13th to October 1st of the following year, if you're awarded it when the grant would actually be official. So, you know, you need to accommodate, again, not only that year of increase that could happen, but just, you know, any unknowns within a reasonable limit. And then for your assessment grants, you need to allocate at least 40% of the funds to the actual site assessment work, because with the assessment grant, you can do some great planning activities. There are eligible activities that are planning related. I think we have a link to that at the end of our slide deck here. And so that does talk about great things, as she was mentioning, a resource roadmap, infrastructure study, market study, things like that. Those can be done, but as it says, you're going to be viewed more favorably with your application as long as at least 40% of it is assessment work. Here's just a screenshot to show you a budget example. So this shows you, you know, some pretty good detail for a budget, but it's not getting too weedy. It just gives some logic behind how you came up with these numbers. And so again, a screenshot from what we would call a pretty good example here for the budget table, and then just elaborating under this each specific task. When it comes to outputs, your cleanup grant should be sure to be clear on the actual cleanup plans, the community involvement plans. Sylvia was touching on that earlier. Your final ABCA, or the analysis of brownfield cleanup alternative documents, administrative records, and then also your cleanup completion report. When it comes to the assessment grant, your activities under that can include your site inventories, Phase 1 and 2 environmental site assessments, site cleanup plans, not the actual cleanup, planning activity deliverables, which again, examples of those are included on the site we have shown later, and community meetings. When it comes to measuring progress, there are different ways you can handle that. So you want to be able to track, measure, and evaluate your progress throughout the duration of your grant. Some of these tools for tracking include software products, progress reporting, scheduled team meetings, and contractor support. So we, as a previous recipient of a Brownfield assessment grant, we use a free software that we share with our consultant who does our environmental site assessments. And so we can both do updates in real time. So, you know, it's much better than a Word document, and it's a living document that we are constantly updating. So that is very helpful because we can all be in there at the same time. And then I take that information and I put it into the acres reporting that is required for the quarterly EPA reports. We do meet regularly as a team. Certainly recommend that for you. Find a date and a schedule that works. And just to have regular updates between all the members on your team that need to be there on a regular basis. And when it comes to actually tracking the accomplishments, so the big picture of your grant, you need to be able to check status of leveraging other critical funding. Again, that was mentioned earlier. How are you going to actually help bring this project to fruition? And then documenting the steps toward actually bringing this redevelopment vision plan to life. For the cleanup grants only, when you talk about the proposed cleanup plan, you want to talk about outlining the cleanup plan and that's proposed for the site. Briefly describe the contaminants that have been found there as a result of your Phase 1 and Phase 2. And Phase 2 is a deeper dive of the extent, the likely extent of the contamination that you may be dealing with, and identifying how you're going to clean it up and your disposal requirements. That information can come from your ABCA, or the alternative analysis of brownfield cleanup alternatives. It's a lot of acronyms sometimes. So the content within that document can be used to go into your plan. And when you're applying for your cleanup grant, you just need to have your draft ABCA, and then that gets solidified as you are working on your cleanup plan. Tish, can you think of anything else I should have put in section 3?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah,
No?
but like you showed the budget chart, that's good. And there's different ways to show stuff, but because you are limited on pages, it's good if you can put stuff in charts,
Thank you.
understandable, but yeah.
Thanks. All right. And then the final section is part 4. So that's your programmatic capability and past performance. This is where you want to highlight the organizational structure, identify how your team is going to be structured to make sure that the grant is carried out successfully, identifying those people and that just like you do within your own organization. And then with that, you give the description of the key staff. It's so snippets really from a resume to document the skill set that the particular people bring to the table and how they're going to help bring this to fruition for you. And then acquiring additional resources. So just as Tish was mentioning earlier with the resource roadmap, that is a planning tool. Of course, you may not find until you actually get into an assessment grant, but try to understand how you're going to actually find that additional resource and apply that. And actually talking about the additional expertise, you need to make sure also that you have a method in place for folks who may retire or take another position from your team. You need to make sure the EPA knows that you can, in fact, keep this process moving should that change in your internal structure happen. Okay. So when it comes to past performance, you need to answer this category with one of the three ways. So the first option would be that applicants, they either currently have or have had an EPA Brownfield grant before, and you can demonstrate that with how successful you were with that, right? You received the grant and you carried it out in a timely manner. Applicants who have not yet received a Brownfield grant, but they do have other federal or non-federal grant experience. So you want to be sure to demonstrate that you understand the grant process and you can make that happen, because you do want to, the EPA does want to be sure they're trying to reach new applicants. And then applicants who have never received federal or non-federal grants before. This one, it likely results in a neutral score, if you just don't have any experience to demonstrate. SAM.gov. This is Carrie's favorite point to talk about, so I'm sure I won't do it justice, but I'll try. So SAM.gov is very important. It is required for any federal grant. So if this is your first time applying for an EPA Brownfield grant, you may think, well, I don't have a SAM.gov account, but the reality is someone else in your organization very well may, if you have applied for other federal funding, or someone does if they have applied for federal funding. So you can find that person within your organization. And so this is a screenshot of what the website looks like. You can go on here to, again, create your registration or update it. Once you do have a SAM.gov account and you have an active grant, you do need to check in on it and make sure you renew it once a year. If not, it'll lapse, and that's a big headache. And so again, someone within your organization may already have it. This could be your city or county clerk, your city manager, or if you have a grant writer. So check with them, make them your friend. And then when you register or renew it, you need to have a unique entity ID, your tax ID number, bank routing number, and then the non-federal entities need to mail an original, signed, and notarized letter to the Federal Service Desk within 30 days of activation. If you have any questions with this, please feel free to reach out to us. We've tried to help and we have navigated this process with some other folks. It's not a one-size-fits-all. Each person's dilemma seems to be a little bit different. So we're happy to jump in the weeds and try to figure out what the situation may be with you. And Carrie would certainly want me to tell you to watch out for scams. If someone sends you something and says, hey, for this low price, we can help you handle SAM.gov, don't fall for it, call your TAB provider, and we can help you with that. So
Can I just add, yeah, this is
Please.
really important, because we've had grantees, I didn't check that they weren't renewed, and they sent us an application in, and either it's expired or there's like a different name from what they're applying under, and this can just, so we, in our, what we send out to people is, make sure you are registered and examined, make sure you have this correct, because it has caused problems, and even some applicants not going through even the threshold situation because they just, if this isn't in order, we can't give you a grant. You really need to have this done properly.
Excellent point. Thank you. All right, Tish, that brings you up next for the value
Okay.
of the debrief process.
Okay, and like I already mentioned, Maryland Department of Planning did apply 1 year and they only missed by 1 point. It was like, oh, so we had a debrief with them. And it's kind of tough if they only missed by 1 point giving a debrief because it really was close to a perfect application. But anyway, so it's great because you can get information as to where areas, if you're going to apply the next year, and hopefully you will. Like I said, usually I don't know if anybody got on the first go round, but there probably are some, that you can then, keep that in mind for your next year's application. And, as again, some priorities change. I think EJ and climate change are going to be priorities, for several years going forward. So the debriefs include us, and the state can come in also, and we can answer questions you have, and like I said, help you with areas that maybe you could improve upon. And like I said, it says we're on the same team. Like I want to give the money to every single applicant I read. The community, especially you figure we're in the Northeast or Mid-Atlantic United States, and that's the areas that were first, colonized, and then industrialized, and so we've got a big need. Not that the other regions don't, but we have a very, very big need. Yeah.
Thank you
Okay.
very much. All right. So, questions. Does anyone have any questions about anything up to this point? It's perfectly okay to send us questions following this session. Again, Becca's going to send out the recorded session and also the slide deck, which I think we may go in and make a couple of edits to. Inevitably, we seem to go, oh, that link didn't work. So we're happy to answer any questions.
And West Virginia TAB is who to go to with your questions, because once the request for proposals out, EPA, we cannot answer any. We can just give you, like we've done the slideshow, this general information, but we cannot give you any like, oh, we'll make sure, look at your application, say, oh, well, you need to beef this up here or that. West Virginia University, they've got a great experience. That's how they were selected for the TAB for the whole region, and yeah. So and what I was going to say back to the debrief. I mentioned in the beginning, West Virginia University is our TAB. I'll put a plug in. We also have a TBA, which is Targeted Brownfields Assessment. So when here we go. Yeah, technical assistance. Yeah, so that we're going to go on to that later. But that's if you don't get if you haven't been accepted, we can offer you this technical assistance where EPA will use our contractors to do an assessment for you. But I'm jumping ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, you can talk right about this. Sylvia wanted to make sure, I think Sylvia and or Barb wanted to make sure we mentioned that we just bring to your attention some other assistance that's available, just as we've already teased a little bit. So on the left is of course the EPA Brownfield grants, which you all are now pretty well versed in after this webinar. And then also, as Tish said, you could go for a targeted brownfield assessment or technical assistance through the EPA. Sometimes it may be that if your community feels that you are not quite ready to take on a full-blown EPA Brownfield grant, a TBA could be a great way to get your foot in the door, get familiar with the EPA, get them familiar with you. And as she said, it is wonderful that you're working with their contractor, so that takes a big heavy lift off of you, and it's a rolling application deadline.
It's free. It's free. Yes. It's just we sometimes we'll run out of money in August or something, but then October 1 we get more funding. So
yes. And so this provides just a little more information on it. Again, EPA Brownfield Grant is a hard deadline. It's nationally competitive. The applicant is responsible for oversight of the grant, and then assessment grants are usually for multiple sites. When you shift to the technical assistance, sites are selected on a rolling basis, so it's not that hard and fast deadline. Each region does have a dedicated EPA contact person that you can get in touch with that can help you navigate that process. It is regionally focused rather than national. The process is facilitated by the EPA, and then generally it's targeted at one site or contiguous sites. Tish, you have any more light to shed on that comparison?
And in past, I mean, I can't believe it. I've had meetings with communities, and I'm like, this is free, and it's only a couple pages. We do require now you to get permission, a letter from the property owner that you want to do an assessment of. So we're not spinning wheels, on a property that you're going to go out. Our contractor is going to show up, and they're like, no, you can't come on my property. So we do ask. That's a new thing we've added to it. But yeah, these are really fantastic, and because we haven't had a ton of applicants in the past, I can't believe it, but we haven't. And sometimes we spend a lot of money on a site because we have this. We still have money. Come July, if there's still money in this community, who said, well, like, can you do this too? And we've spent a lot of money. It's just not like a few $1,000s or something we've spent. So definitely, think about that. Or even if you're applying for a grant and you've got a community that's like a little bit further away that really doesn't connect with your planning, maybe they've got a property in the center of town or the entrance to the town or something. Yeah.
Hey, Tish, we've got another question in the chat
Sure.
for you. Have you ever recommended a few groups to join forces to form a coalition if they are working in similar geographic areas such as Baltimore City?
Oh yeah, we always encourage that. I haven't spoken to anybody specifically, but you just have to have the lead organization, and like I said, it's an art and a science to write a grant application, and so you need somebody to administer the grant. So yeah, we definitely encourages like these smaller. Like I said, if you get somebody to write and you get a grant, but then you got to have somebody overseeing. You hire. We abbreviate anything. QEP, it's a qualified environmental professional, and there are a lot of consulting companies out there. They've been doing brownfield work for years. They do a great job, and they'll do. They meant, I don't know if it was Katie or Becca ever mentioned the acres, our reporting system, and that stands for something. Don't ask me what it is. But when you get selected for a grant, you have to. You put your quarterly reports in there, and all kinds of different information you need to report to us, leveraging and acres ready for reuse if you get to that point and stuff like that. But anyway, yeah, so your qualified environmental professional will handle all that for you, okay? Because it's kind of a pain in the neck. But anyway, but you still have to have somebody in whoever that coalition lead is that's keeping track, and checking the expenses and approving what the consultants, besides EPA approves before you can spend any of our money, you have to submit, of course, a form to us, and then we approve if you can go out and do whatever you're requesting to do. So anyway, but yeah, I just you just have to hire a good consultant, and I encourage anybody to do if you've got one partner that can do the application and then oversee the whole grant period. Yeah, please. Yeah. Gather as many as you can.
The lead applicants, typically nonprofits. We're essentially we're a small private startup company, but we're looking to work with other local nonprofits that would potentially be the lead. And part of our thinking is to have, STEM learning programs that engage with the students of Baltimore City. So we're speaking with the Power 52 Foundation, which is a pretty big foundation in the Baltimore for renewable energy. And I wanted to know if it was appropriate for me to approach them as potentially being the lead if we didn't have the resources necessarily to be the lead.
Yeah, if they qualify as one, not a 501 501(c) is good, but not a 4. Yeah, if they qualify as they can apply. Yeah, definitely. And I don't know if you're aware, Civic Works in Baltimore, but we have another wonderful grant program, it's job training. And they train community members, returning prisoners to actually do the work in their communities. They get certifications, OSHA certifications and all this type thing. But yeah, the thing about students, that's another thing is we've done some of these grants where we've gone to high schools, you know, the assessment grants, and in terms of planning for what the community wants to see, you know, because you get the adults coming to the meetings, but so we actually have gone to high schools and said, well, what would you like to see in your community to get a different perspective? But yeah, as long as they're an eligible entity, yeah, it would be great. We really want to reach out to smaller communities, disadvantaged communities, you know. So yeah, please, and check with the tab on, you know, you have further questions. Yeah. I
That's
can't
great.
answer them.
I had found them, the Civic Works program, so I'm really glad you said that, because it sounds like if I'm able to bring 3 or 4 of these groups together, such as those 2 and 1 or 2 others, we could have a good team, you know, between the 4 or 5 of us.
Right. And Civic Works has gotten like 9 grants from us. They're incredible. So
Wow.
they know their stuff. Eli Allen is the person I've worked with in the past at Civic Works. And that's the thing is, like I was saying about assessment grants, like we designate some for new, because like some places like Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation, they could get a grant every year. They know how to write a grant, they know how to manage, you know, and stuff like that. So we started cutting away some for new applicants, because it was like, you know, some of these ones just can get them year after year, you know. I mean, and they're doing good work, but we like to spread it around a little more. Yeah.
Great questions. Thank you so much. Just here's a little bit more information about technical assistance. It's really just an elaboration of what we've been talking to. Honestly, the conversation that Tish and Keith were having is kind of that. For technical assistance, kind of I think there's some overlap in the actual coalitions. So, you know,
Right.
with technical assistance, it does give you the chance to, again, build that relationship with your stakeholders, but also the EPA, and fill in some gaps, as it says, that site planning that's not often funded. So anyway, lots of great resources here with technical assistance as well.
And I would like to add, besides that, Katie, we have technical, like you said, that targeted brownfield assessments, TBAs, but we also have, like you mentioned you had on the slide about other technical assistance for regionally directed and land revitalization. So we've gotten an infusion money there. And regionally, so Keith might want to keep it in mind. We're going to be looking for, contact me. We're going to be looking for more applications to submit in January. And these are contractors, our EPA's contracted to work. Regional directive is kind of broken into market analysis and financial analysis. So if you don't get a grant, or you're not ready this year to apply, let me know if you've got something, you know, you would like to, you know, specific, like you want some assistance on, and that could help with your application package next year. And the land revitalization has been a program that's been going for a long time. And we usually only gave out like $330,000 worth of assistance, but now with the bill and infrastructure, we gave out like 150,000. We gave out, in fact, all 4 that applied got grants. So it was like, wow, you know. So that's something to think of. We typically, you know, we'll put it in our, if you're not on, get in touch with me to get on our newsletter. We try not to bombard you out too much on the newsletter, but like if there's something big coming up, we want to get that out and get that information to you. So that information will be in or it's not monthly really, however often we send it out, our newsletter there too.
Thank you. All right. I think we have a poll and we're ready for Seth to speak.
That's true. Right before Seth starts, I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll. And if you've got the latest version of Zoom, you should have seen a question pop up. If you could please answer it and rate your current understanding of EPA Brownfields grants. And this data just helps us with our own grant requirements and data. So while you're answering that, I'll let Seth go ahead.
So just some general wrap up and housekeeping. WVU TAB is here to help. We have a ton of resources that we can provide, as Tish and Katie have both touched upon. All of these resources are free, as we are the Region 3 provider of technical assistance. So what type of assistance does this include? We do brownfield education, including trainings, webinars, and events, webinars like today's event included, resource identification, grant writing assistance, grant review, and resource roadmaps. We also help with local brownfield program support, and in that building the brownfield inventory development, questions on potential brownfield sites and technical support with those sites, and project development and design assistance. Site-specific design assistance is provided with support from WVU's Davis College. So just to wrap up, some important deadlines to remember. November 3rd is the deadline to submit draft applications to our office at WVU TAB for review. November 3rd is also the deadline to submit a request for a letter to the Maryland Department for the Environment. And November 13th is the EPA grant submittal deadline. It is at 11:59 p.m., no later, but we always encourage early if you can get it in pending any technical difficulties or anything that may happen the day of. And this is resources and references for you to use. You'll be getting a PDF version of this slide deck after the presentation. These are all hyperlinks, so you'll find upcoming events and webinars, grant writing resources, state-specific resources, other funding opportunities, EPA eligible planning activities, as well as access to the EPA's EJ Screen tool, which is a good data tool. And this is the contact information for the lovely folks in Maryland and at the EPA that have helped with today's presentation. And last but not least, our contact information at WVU TAB. You'll notice on the bottom of the left-hand side, our office email is there. So if you have any questions, we encourage you to direct them to there or to one of us through our contact information. We also encourage you to stay connected. Follow us on X or Facebook at WVU TAB, same for both. Our website's also hyperlinked. We also encourage you to sign up for our newsletter, and we are also really pushing those of you that have questions to schedule for a one-on-one consultation. It not only gives us more face time with you to understand your problems, but it allows us to better assist you with technical assistance.
Excellent, thanks. I really hope you all will take advantage of all the people on this team. Take good advantage of them because you really do have a great team for you here in Maryland. I know Barb, Sylvia, and Tish are all so responsive to us, and they genuinely want to help you do the best that they can for your organization, and that goes year round. So, you know, any questions you have, please don't hesitate to reach out to them. You really do have a fun group of folks to work with. If you don't feel that you're quite ready for this round of applications, we're happy to help you and love to help you get ready for an application, you know, for the next year. There's a lot we can do to help you build that application, start to build your coalition maybe for the next year, to, you know, anything to help prepare for the next year as well. So it's never too late to start planning ahead.